I'm going to kind of start with a quick introduction, and then we'll kind of get into the meat of today's conversations. I think for many of you, you guys might be joining over the lunch hour, so my goal is to keep this to give or take about 30 minutes or so. With that said, I do want to make this as conversational as possible. So I do have the chat pulled up. If anybody has any questions or comments or wants to contribute to today's conversation, please do toss it in there. I think to set the stage a little bit, today we're talking about AI, obviously a very trendy conversation. It's kind of been impacting all of us in our own personal lives as well as in our, I guess, business operations. And the reason why we're having this conversation is if you're like me or many of us, we hear a lot about AI. We've kind of dabbled in some of these different tools, like Chat GPT or Gemini. And now we're kind of digging deeper into like, how can we practically apply some of these concepts and some of these really, really powerful tools to some of our programming to not just streamline a lot of your time and your operations, but also how do we elevate our programs and the experience our end users have with AI. So I'm going to kind of go ahead and give a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll kind of jump into the first discussion point here today. So my name is Kyle. I'm the CEO here at Reviewr. Been doing this since we started the company back in 2010. I think what makes us rather unique and positioned to have these conversations is our deep background as participants ourselves in what we call funding opportunities. So kind of lived a prior life where, all of these types of programs are done through physical paper, if you can believe it. So awards, grants, scholarships, conferences, you name it. The application process itself was very binder centric. So we as volunteer committee members had physical binders mailed to our doorstep. We're asked to handwrite notes and feedback and scores and send it back. And then we kind of live the online transformation. So it's a combination of built-in web forms and emails and spreadsheets and downloading of documents. And truthfully, as a volunteer, I would say probably 4x the time was spent with that workflow opposed to the paper process. And then on top of that, we saw a couple of very problematic things started happening. So volunteer fatigue is a real thing, started to bleed into the integrity of the programs. We saw information getting misplaced and mislost. We saw a lack of data redaction for some of these campaigns, leading to very clear biases in the selection process. So we built Reviewr as an online platform to kind of run holistically these types of programs for foundations and associations from literally start to finish. So everything from the intake of applications, all the operational tools, the built-in review, judging, and scoring modules, and then of course any ongoing data collection from recipients that you guys might have. So long-winded introduction. The reason why I bring that up though is that we're very fortunate to work with thousands and thousands of these organizations doing a wide variety of programs in Reviewr. Again, recognition awards is a core component to a membership-based association. If you guys have foundation arms, things like grants and scholarships, your board nominations, your volunteer committee apps, all of your different conference programs, so proposals, abstracts, speakers, you name it. So over the last 8 or so months, we've worked very, very closely with our current clients to kind of better define like, hey, AI is obviously permeating our lives very quickly. What are you guys doing as far as looking at policies? What are you looking at as far as, how you might want to leverage AI for these programs specifically? And that list can go on and on and on. I think it's been a really fruitful 8 months of feedback to us. With that said, there are kind of 5 core common trends that we've started to identify that right away can make an extreme impact on your programs. Again, both from an operational efficiency perspective, but also leads into things like compliance and a better experience for your end users. So broadly speaking today, a lot of these conversations may revolve around like recognition awards. I think it's one of the more flagship programs that an association does. With that said, some of these AI elements are going to be more valuable and be more impactful for other use cases. So for those of you who do multiple things, scholarships, grants, conferences, keep that in mind as we go. So with all that said, let's jump into today's first discussion point. Like I said, I want to try to get through this in about 30 minutes or so. I do want to kind of toss this out there, though, that if any of you guys are currently using any type of AI in assistance to power these types of campaigns, or if you guys started to think through different types of policies within your organization, toss them in the chat. I'm very interested to see what you guys are up to, kind of what you guys are thinking through. And if you guys are already doing some of these things, that's actually really, really great to hear. So I'm going to start off with the first item here, which is AI detection. So to set the stage on this concept a little bit, and again, this is one of those AI tools I think will be relevant to a lot of different use cases. Obviously, if you have a foundation doing scholarships, it's very, very a big deal. With that said, we're seeing it a ton in award programs from like a reference letter perspective, or even like nomination packets. So the idea behind this, and again, to set the stage, is there's a growing concern from our clients that the applicants themselves who are applying to your programs, nominators, nominees, speakers to a conference, are leveraging tools like ChatGPT and these many other AI tools out there to literally create their content for them. And now, again, this is where like the conversations need to come into play of like how much utilization of AI is okay. I personally am a huge advocate of AI. I use it for a lot of different use cases. I even use it to help come up with Christmas gifts ideas for my kids. But there's a dramatic difference between going into Chat GPT and saying, hey, here's a prompt from my application form or for my scholarship. Here's some information about myself. Now go write it for me and then copy and paste it back in. Question just came in around clarity. If we're talking about like Grammarly or things like generative AI like Chat GPT or Claude, it'd be the latter half of things. It'd be the actual writing of content for them, the generative AI, not necessarily using tools like Grammarly. But I'm glad that you brought that up because I am going to come back to that because it does raise some potential red flags with what many organizations are doing to try to identify the use of AI. So again, kind of going back to where I was starting with, is that there's a growing number of a concern of the end user applicants basically having AI act as themselves and write their content. Again, and then the question comes into play, well, how much AI is too much? So what happens here is a lot of our clients are basically making assumptions that, hey, this seems like it's so well written that it was written with AI. And in that case, maybe it wasn't AI. Maybe they just use things like Grammarly to refine their content. But there's this like subjective, no data behind the scenes to justify decisions where when people apply, they have like these giant red text that says, hey, I think you're using AI or we've identified that you've used AI to write your content, we're going to disqualify you. And then what's ended up happening here is that it's like false flagging or identifying incorrectly the wrong people. It's also a very hard stance when we don't necessarily have the data to back that decision up. So what we've been kind of tasked with here at Reviewr, I'm going to kind of walk you through this, is helping you guys identify the utilization of AI and specifically to what extent. So I'm going to kind of go ahead and pull a really quick example here for us. But the idea, and I'm going to try to read these questions. So does the only apply to those who don't disclose or once disclosed, then we're worried? Yeah, so I think a lot of organizations, that's a great question. So a lot of organizations are making assumptions that you might be using AI and they're inadvertently just disqualifying people or they're knocking points off your application. And that's extremely problematic because they have no data to back that up and there's no fair warning to you. So for a lot of our clients, what we're at least trying to get them to do is to put a flag on their website that says, hey, we have tools in place because we're going to kind of get into that right now that can help us identify if you're using AI or not. And if we catch you using it, then we're going to disqualify you. And then again, that's going to be one of those things where like, if you're going to say that, you have to have the data to back it up. So great to see all these questions in chat coming in. I'm going to come back to some of these so I can kind of run through this example. But our commitment at Reviewr is to help you guys at least have awareness of what's going on, right? And then that way you can start to leverage this data to make decisions and set policies. Now, to be very clear, I don't think I'm on the camp of disqualifying people for the use of AI. I think that there's extreme examples of like 100% copy and paste. And at that point, you can go ahead and do so. But anything like sub 30, 40%, I think is good to go. It also largely depends on the type of award that you're running. So for example, we work with some interior design associations, right? And these submitters themselves are firms. And you have like these large, massive Goliath-based organizations that have dedicated marketing departments who are going to put forth really great content writing. And then you got these boutique firms who quite frankly don't have those resources. And so like using AI to help take their content, which is valid, it's theirs, and refine it to put them in the best position for success is totally fine, right? So there's this gray area, and that's where I think AI is going to change the game dramatically over the next 6 to 12 months as we start to learn more about what's happening. So in Reviewr, the general premise here is we want to help you guys identify like how much AI is being used, and then on an applicant by applicant basis, like what is their usage. So you can kind of see here really quickly a menu which shows you a listing of all of your submissions. Again, these could be award nominations, it could be call for speakers, it could be scholars. And it gives you two different columns, one of which is an AI check and the other is a plagiarism check. And the idea behind this is comprehensively on a per person basis, what percent of their packet or of their entry was written with the utilization of AI. And then from there, what you guys can do is start to filter from high to low, as well as create averages. So you can say, hey, if we had 75 submissions this last year, the average amount of AI that was used was, let's just make up a number, 40%. Now we have a baseline or a threshold. And quite frankly, we don't care what that number is. If it's 80%, so be it. That's the average. If it's 20%, so be it. That's the average. But now that we know, so then you can start to say, okay, well, if we find anybody who uses, AI for, 20% higher than the average, we're going to make some decisions off of that. So this data, this interface gives you the ability to see what's going on. And then when you click into somebody's submission, it'll actually show you each question that we ran the AI detection against. And then when you want to check the results, you just click into it. And this is where it gets pretty subjective. So this is where it'll show you the exact content that was analyzed. We're integrating with multiple partners to do this. And then to the question earlier on about Grammarly, it's going to show you, hey, was this like human content? Was it AI content? Was it just used to revamp the grammar and spelling and reshuffle the formatting? Or was it a literal verbatim copy and paste out of a tool like ChatGPT? And then again, now that you have this information, you guys can at least make decisions off of it and set policies. Going back to plagiarism detection, it's a little bit easier. This would be more relevant for those of you guys doing conferences with speakers, abstracts, and things like that. The plagiarism detection will actually catch the content and then show you specifically where it was flagged from. Again, since it's plagiarism, we can actually we can do that. Yeah, so self-plagiarism, again, it's going to show you exactly the source it came from. So in that example, you can either create some automations to down select if it was self-plagiarized or if it was their own work that was flagged. So I'm going to kind of keep moving on. There's still 4 more topic points for us here today, but we'll come back to any questions you guys might have on detection. So the next one is going to shift more from an operational perspective. It's one that I'm actually most excited about, and it's creating summaries, or how I would rather position this as review briefs. So put yourselves in the perspective of a volunteer review committee member, and you're tasked with reading through all these applications. Again, application is arbitrary: scholarship, grant, award, fellowship, you name it. And at some point in time, depending on the length and complexity of these forms, everybody kind of starts to look very, very similar. And you're allocating X amount of time per submission to rank them, review them, and score them. Volunteer fatigue is a real thing. Some of our data suggests that a typical volunteer really has a tough time looking at more than, give or take 40 or so submissions. So if we can't expand our review team, and I'm going to come back to that as well, or use other tools to help do randomization to level the playing field, then how do we make it so they're reviewing more than 40 submissions, but they're spending half the time doing the review? And to do that, we can start to consider things like summaries. And the reason why summaries are extremely powerful is it's able to take a lot of information. So content from forms, content from file uploads, even content from other judges and evaluators that scored it. And we can start to consolidate that into a brief that very specifically calls out the key items that you want your review team to look for. Let's be very clear. When you're reviewing an application, there's a lot of fluff, and your team is kind of scattered, reading through top to bottom, trying to nitpick and find the most relevant data that powers their decision-making process. So if we can use AI summaries to kind of take this large, complex data set, put it into something more bite-sizable and manageable, and then specifically call out the key data points that you want to, you're still getting the same benefit as if they read the entire application form and the supporting documents, but now it's going to be much more condensed and literally cut their time in half. How I think this is going to be used, I certainly believe we have a lot of clients that are going to replace their application forms with summaries. So you're going to still submit an application, but then the summaries themselves are what's going to get used to power the judging and scoring process. I think a larger percent of our clients, so will use it as a vetting tool. So make up a number. Say you had 200 submissions and your job is to narrow it down to the top 100. Why not start with the summaries to make that review process quicker and more simple, just to kind of weed out the thumbs up, thumbs down, and then you can narrow your focus in on the top 100. Now you're still reading the top 100, but you saved yourself 50% of time, which again, volunteer fatigue is a real thing. So practically, what does that look like? In this example, you might get something like this. This is an award program where, and by design, it's an award because there's a lot of complex information here. We have information about the nominator, so who submitted the nomination. We have information about the nominee, right? And this is generally going to be submitted by the nominee. I'm not going to get into that today. Those are prior webinars that we have hosted around having a dual nominator nominee workflow where the nominee actually gets notified and asked to complete their own portion, and then the system can kind of merge the data together. Again, that's for a different day. But in this simple example here, as I scroll through here, we have a lot of information about the nominee. We've got their career accomplishments, we've got their impact on profession, we have their leadership experience, we've got multiple letters of recommendation, we have supporting documents, headshots, resumes, you name it. So to read through this information is going to take somebody a substantial amount of time. So what we could consider doing instead is flipping this to a summary version. And then again, now we have a high-level overview of the nominee. We have an overview of their eligibility. We have a synopsis of their key achievements, some of their mentorship, what their references said about them. And then we can even get really fancy. We can do fit assessments. So we can start to compare some of this data against what you're looking for in a candidate, just to kind of call out, like, are they on or off track? Are they like a good candidate versus maybe a less quality candidate? Now, again, the intention here is not completely to replace human reviews, although I think it's going to for some clients. It's meant to be a way for me as an evaluator to get a high level overview of the candidate, make a quick thumbs up, thumbs down decision, and then allocate our time on those that we want to spend the most time on. Another way I think this could be used, and I'll leave it at this, is for those of you who take specifically in an award and you want to create a summary or a bio of the award recipient to then put on your website or use for marketing purposes. Now you no longer need them to write it for you, and you no longer need to kind of go through this. You can basically just take this information and this becomes the summary for you. So I'm kind of looking through some notes here. So guardrails on a machine generated versus an organization verified rubric. So yeah, to be very, very clear, this is, we talked about a lot here. The goal is to basically summarize the content for your own internal team to use their own rubrics against, right? So we're not actually using AI to rank and score this particular applicant. We are just condensing the content for our judging committee to score. With that said, if we were to try to go deep down that rabbit hole and do things like fit assessments, or if we want to attempt to use AI to score this particular candidate, you have to have two things in place. You have to have a scorecard and a rubric that very clearly aligns with your application form and specifically call out which elements within your rubric you value the most, right? You might want to weight it and things like that. And then the second piece to that is if you have any prior data of award recipients, that way we can use, or you can use that information to help identify a strong quality candidate. Now, I kind of challenge that because we don't know in the past how valid the review process was. Was there biases? Was there volunteer fatigue? Do we collect it right? Right. In that model, we might be have a flawed data to train the model. So I want to just set the standard here that I don't personally believe we're in a position where we can replace human judging and scoring with AI models, but I do believe in 1 to 2 years that certainly could be a discussion point that's worth having. So thank you for bringing that up. To be very clear, though, the scope here is basically taking nomination packets, scholarship forms, committee applications, whatever it might be, taking a large amount of information and summarizing into the most clear details, eliminate all the fluff that your team can then use to make the most informed decisions they can. The next thing I want to look at is going to be a combination of like eligibility tracking, but also verifying of documentation. So again, trying to stay broad and high level here. I know most associations are on the call today, and you guys do a wide variety of program types. Again, awards, grants, scholarships. I keep saying that because some of these tools are going to be used in different ways depending on the program type. But again, to set the stage here, I'm going to talk about this from a perspective of a scholarship. But again, this applies to all of your programs. You have applicants submitting to you guys within your application form a lot of content. You're also then asking them to support their submission with supporting documents and file uploads. So if it's a scholarship, you might have in the form their GPA, their institution they're graduating from, their credit hours, and then in a file upload, you might be collecting things like parent tax documentation to verify household income. You might be collecting transcripts and things like that. On the award side, you might have in the form like, are they a member or not, their member ID number, years of being a member, their achievements, and then they might be uploading either supporting documents or you're having to talk to your AMS to verify those details. And the verification process is really important because while we want to trust our submitters, human errors are a thing. I'm not saying that they're lying to you by putting something incorrectly in the form to help their chance of being successful, but I do believe, keying in something incorrectly does happen. And so what you have to basically do is read through the entire submission form and then look at all of these file uploads to compare them and analyze them just to confirm that they match up. And if you catch one that's wrong, it was well worth your time. But if you had to go through 100 of them and you didn't catch any, you still had to go through that entire process because otherwise you would have missed something. So the reason why I want to bring that up is on average, it takes people about 15 minutes to go through that entire verification process. If you had 100 submissions, we're looking at like tens and tens of hours. So in Reviewr, one of the models that we're launching here is document verification. So again, to keep it simple, this is a scholarship example, but you guys kind of get the point for other use cases. But we can kind of call out like, what do we want to verify? So in this example, we want to verify that the GPA is what it says it is. We want to verify their credit hours, their household income, their expected graduation date. Now, again, if this was an award program, you might be verifying things like membership status, IDs, years of member, right? All these different things. Now, for each one of these, though, there are file uploads. So, for example, the GPA has a transcript, and using AI, we can actually go and analyze that document, pull the data out, and then compare it to the form. So we can go and say, hey, find the GPA. Now, once we found the GPA, we can say, does it match what was said in the form? If not, flag it for us. And you can kind of see here that if I view the document, there's a transcript, there's the GPA, boom, they match. If I go back here to another example, whoops. If I go back here to another example and I want to look at my discrepancies, I could say, okay, well, the expected graduation date says it's May. However, the document itself says December. So if I go ahead and use view document, you can kind of see that's where it pulled from. So hopefully you guys can start to picture the value that this has and the amount of time it'll save you. The other thing that's kind of forward thinking is why are we asking applicants for things like their membership ID or their transcripts or their grades if they're just going to submit file uploads anyways? So using this type of technology, we can actually audit their file uploads and then pre-fill the form for them to both save them substantial time, increase their experience, but then also verify accuracy on your end without having to do anything like this whatsoever. The next thing I want to look at is data redaction. So I am kind of curious, and it might be hard for me to be able to see this with this many people on the call. But if anybody wants to like leave a reaction or an emoji, are you guys doing any data redaction from the review team's perspective? So basically hiding things like name or demographics or any PII to avoid any potential bias in the selection. Like I said, I'll scroll through. I'll try to see if I can find anybody that's doing that. So right now in Reviewr, it's a very common model. Many of our clients will try to do some form of redaction. That way, when the review team comes in, there's no data being provided to them that might cause a bias. And I know it's a sad conversation to have, but it does happen quite often. Where this becomes more tricky because in Reviewr, if we know things like their name and their email and their demographics, or like what their chapter is, we can automatically hide it from the judge's point of view. One click, it does it all for you. That's great. Where this becomes more challenging is if it's in long form content, like a letter of recommendation or an essay, or if it's in a file upload, like a transcript or like a supporting document. So using AI, I'll just kind of keep this one quite brief. The system can basically identify from their form what's considered PII and then start to scan long form content, scan the file uploads. And if it catches it, it can do redaction for you. So instead of saying, Dr. Sarah Chen, a senior member of the Chicago chapter, now it might say redacted nominee, a senior member of redacted chapter. So again, that will save your team a whole heck of a lot of time. It's also very important because if we're going to commit to data redaction, we have to commit to it, right? We can't just loosely say, yeah, if we see it, we're going to do it. It has to be a very thorough job doing that. So the last thing I want to look at is going to be on the judging side. There's a lot that we can talk about here. And the reason why I say that is that on the judging side, there's so many protocols in place that impact the results. And I'll just keep it very brief. It could be things like doing auto and random distribution of submissions to judges. It could be managing and looking at their workload capacity to make sure that they're not getting fatigued. It could be shuffling the list that they see when they score. That way, not everybody works top to bottom, because if you work top to bottom, the person that scored last now has comparison bias, right? So there are so many protocols that go into configuring a proper judging experience. I'm not going to cover those today. I do think that will be either the end of this month or early January, another webinar topic. With that said, there is one thing that I want to call out, and that's personal judging tendencies. And this is, again, where AI comes into play. So I'm going to kind of just walk you guys through an example here. So let's go back over to Reviewr. And Reviewr in itself has a very powerful judging system. There's a lot of tools in place to pair up your submissions with your review team. And we do try to make it very clear for you guys, your dates and deadlines, the judge to applicant ratio to avoid, volunteer fatigue. But we have what we call assignment models. And these are the different ways that you guys can configure judging. So for example, one of those options might be all committee members review all submissions. One of the options might be manual. So you manually pick and choose specifically what committee members are looking at what entries. And then there's the model that's most commonly used in Reviewr, which is randomization. So teams will say, hey, I cannot have my committee looking at every single submission. It's far too many for them. So what I want to instead do is equally and randomly assign submissions to my committees. So they might come in here and say, hey, I want each of my reviewers to be scoring 3 submissions apiece. Or they might say, I want each submission to be scored 3 times apiece, but never reviewed more than 10 times by a particular judge. So the system will then equally and randomly do this all for you. I love it. It's an incredibly powerful tool. With that said, is it actually induces a tremendous problem, and that's judging tendencies. So let's just play this game. Whereas I, as Kyle, on average, am a tough judge. I score on average of 15. Maria, however, is an easy judge. She gives out scores of 30 left and right. So using a random judging model, you will absolutely penalize an applicant who is assigned to me, but not Maria. So how do you counteract that? So we have a new algorithm here, and it's using AI. Let me go back here a page. That is called Review IQ. And what this does is when we click into our submissions in a very historical judging model, you're looking at total scores, you're looking at average scores. But again, with what I just introduced, average scores go out the window because if I score way lower than other people, the average will start to tank, right? So what Review IQ does is it actually looks at each individual judge, looks at what their own personal averages are, and then how high or low did they score a particular applicant against their own personal average. So if you look at this example down here, Professor Lisa Brown scored an applicant as a 70, but she on average scores a 76. That means she scored about 13% lower than her own personal average. Maria scored a 75, which is actually her own personal average, and then Thomas scored a 72, which is his own personal average. Now, where this becomes really interesting is, again, if Maria scored a 75 and Thomas scored a 72, this implies that Maria scored higher than Thomas. That's factually wrong. They actually gave the exact same score, right? They both scored 100% of their own personal average. So once we can start to identify how a judge is scoring against their own tendencies, we use that new metric to run brand new averages, and then you get Review IQ, which is basically a collective percent amongst your team. So we can kind of say here that, Daniel Lee scored about 13% lower than the collective average, whereas Jessica over here scored about 13% higher than the collective average. So I'm watching the clock. My goal is to be done within about 30 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to kind of pause there. But I think for any of you guys on the call, this type of concept, and you don't have to use Review IQ for this. You can use spreadsheets. I can certainly share with you guys the formulas. I think it's really eye-opening for you to identify your own personal team's tendencies and then compare that to the results and just kind of figure out like, hey, do we have a candidate that didn't get selected because of this reason? And then if so, it might be something worth considering. So with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and open this up to a Q&A for as long as you guys want. Again, my job is hopefully to be here for 30 minutes and then answer questions for as long as you guys want. It can be about Reviewr, it can be about your programs, it can be around AI, whatever I can do for you guys today. So a question came in around if the person only judges 1 time per year, how do you get an average? Well, in that case, it's going to be their own personal average of the one that they scored. So you can do a couple different things. Generally speaking, you're not looking at their own average across programs or across multiple campaigns because each program might be different. What you really care about is for like that specific award program. So like if that judge was assigned 15 submissions, you're going to be able to get a tendency or an average across those 15 that they scored. And then that's what you average out against the other committee members. Yeah, question came in. You want to see the formula? Happy to reach out. We can kind of go share that and go through it. I think it's interesting because you mentioned systematic bias. So that's a good point because what this page will do is it not only takes into consideration tendencies to normalize the results, but if there actually was a bias, it would stick out like an absolute sore thumb because you're going to see a particular judge who scored somebody just so dramatically high or low compared to their own average. Specifically, if they were assigned 10 submissions and 9 of those 10 were within like a margin of error of like 2%, right? And then somebody else was like minus 20%. Now it sticks out. So there's a lot that you can do with that data. Yeah, great question. And I appreciate you bringing that up. So, privacy, it is a big part of this conversation. And so, like, part of our commitment is obviously from an ethics perspective, like, how do we incorporate ethics committees across our clients to make sure we're on or off track? One thing I will call out is that there is a big concern that we have for our own clients. Because we know many of them are dabbling in AI, trying to do things like this, or at least just analyze their data. And the first thing that they do is they start to plug in like their spreadsheets and their own personal data into tools like ChatGPT by OpenAI or Gemini by Google. And the challenge with that is you're now sharing highly confidential data with giant companies who are going to use that data to train their learning language models. So at Reviewr, it's not going to be that case. All of the data is going to be stored on our own infrastructure, the same infrastructure that SOC 2 Type 2 certified that we're already using to power these highly confidential events to begin with. But none of your data will be used to train a model and or compare to other client data. It's very standard for you guys only to execute the task at hand. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Within Reviewr, there are no limitations. So you can have as many reviewers, judges, applicants, committee members as you possibly could want. There's like no set limit. And I think that's important because we do try to promote that here. If you go back here, we actually try to show you guys, some of these ratios, which will then obviously help you guys figure out, like, do you need more potential evaluators to assist? So question came in around, and it's not related to AI, but still a great question. Once the reviews and the results come in, what happens next? Do groups meet and discuss the results to finalize the recipients, or do they take the results from the system? So that is a very good question. I would say, and it's not a clear answer for us, I would say probably like a 60-40 split where 40% will in Reviewr run the reports and look at the raw data to make their selections. And it's going to differ by program type. The other 60% will probably do multiple potential phases of review. There has to be a consensus. And then what they do is they use some of our dashboarding, like the view results page, and they share that out with their team in advance. That way team members come prepare. We're not wasting people's time. And they actually host formal deliberation meetings, but those deliberation meetings are quite condensed because the results have already been shared out. And now you have, committee members who are making a case about a particular applicant for whatever reason. And then you guys in Reviewr, we don't make any decisions for you. You have the complete whereabouts to rearrange it, make your own selections as you desire. So I would say many of them still do that. What I'll tell you is that very few clients share back scores and the results in real time. They wait till all the results come in and then they do that. Yep. The question that came in, I think it was related to the security stuff around people trying to do things like this with like their own, prompt engineering capability, but not going through like enterprise level protection, which is absolutely a critical component to this. Again, we talked about a lot of use cases, but I've seen very firsthand organizations take scholarship information that includes social security numbers and plug that into ChatGPT, which is a big no-no. From a prompt engineering perspective, again, since we have so many of these campaigns powered by Reviewr, you can also kind of like have these prompts in place and then further refine to make it very unique to your own use case. Yeah, question came in on pricing. It's hard because we have different pricing structures depending on how you're going to leverage Reviewr. We have some models that are going to be per program based. We've got some models that are just an annual subscription. You can pay it monthly. Some of our models are going to be based off of the volume of their programs. It could be based off of the futures. So we have kind of different packages just depending on like how many programs you want to run within Reviewr and kind of like what your tool set that you're going to need is. So I can kind of personally reach out and we can discuss that. Yeah, so another kind of good comment came out. I'll have to do a little bit more conversation on this, but it's kind of the comment. It's we're basically we're talking about very non-subjective data-driven decisions opposed to human thinking, and this is where I think that these models will change a lot over time. of how much human involvement is going to come in and how much of the human involvement trains the models on this. I think that it's really important, though, to remove as much subjectivity as we can, but there still should be a human element to this. So many of these programs, the content that's being reviewed is so industry specific, or how it aligns with the specific mission and vision of your unique organization, that your boards, your committees, and your human teams do need to be actively involved. To jump to the very extreme example, if you want to kind of take this trick of saying, hey, let's let AI try to analyze our applications and make selections for us, you could go down that path and then use the results of that as like a pre-review to supplement the human judging. But then we have to be very careful with like, okay, are their mindsets going to be shifted because they're coming in under the impression of what AI told them the highest versus lowest ranked applications are? I would, just while we're thinking here, I would rather flip the switch and say let the humans still do the review using these tools. And then if you wanted to, you could still leverage like an AI-based final selection, compare the two, and then as an admin, you can start to see what was identified as different. And then you could, as an admin, can start to basically dive in there and analyze it deeper, right? Maybe a human missed a key element, or maybe the AI model dehumanized a very key detail. So that's where, again, like we have this conversation today. I think it looks very different in 6 months.